Good morning, everybody. I'm really sorry that I'm not there in person. Instead of enjoying myself in Galway, as you can see, I've been driven back into the day job. My story is called The Tear Bank. Nature's weapon, women's tears. She sat quietly in the waiting room, not lifting her head as I walked through several times, not engaging with me. Head hung down. I called her in. Take a seat there, Anya, and I'll be with you in a moment. The mandatory past history running through my head. I knew her a long time. Medical past, bronchiectasis, ruptured ovarian cyst that had been diagnosed as constipation in A&E. Social past, 2 adult children, 4 grandchildren, but the dominating feature was the very rapid death of her husband about 8 months previously. A quiet, decent man. Her friends told me he did everything for her, and they did not know how she would survive without him. Others said they were surprised at how well she was coping. I felt that little bit guilty that I had not had time to visit her. How are you? I asked. Fine, was the reply. What can I do for you today? The standard GP introduction. Don't know, she said. Your girls told me to come. Is there anything wrong? No, she said. The more open the question, the more closed the answer. Is there anything right? I asked. No, she said. Silence. I haven't seen you since Tom died. No, she said. I've been in, but I couldn't face you. Why? I thought I might cry, and I don't do crying. Why? Because I don't do crying, she shouted as the tears welled up in her eyes. I cried a little at the funeral, but not since. We then talked about Tom. He was the doer in that family. They had a good life, traveled a lot after we retired. They were happy together. I knew him, but then again, I did not know him the way like she did, and I found him a little difficult, quiet but determined, and at times a bit difficult to shift in his ideas about health. The tears were flowing now, and she said, I don't do this. Where does that come from? I asked. I don't know, she replied. Suddenly, I had a deja vu moment. I remember you told me that tears were not allowed in your house when you were growing up. You just get on with it. Flashback 30 years. She was in my surgery with a very cross face on her. I wondered what the issue was, and like most GPs, I wondered what I had done wrong, paranoia being a common amongst us GPs. You seem very cross, I had said. Is that aimed at me or the whole world? I asked. She went on then to tell me about the death of her stillborn child, a boy, how she had not received any sympathy from her family and had been told to get on with it. Tears were not part of her upbringing. I told her this, and she couldn't remember it like I did, but for me, it was as vivid as if it were yesterday. The value of a long-term relationship. Her tears continued to fall, and in true GP style, I offered the Kleenex. We talked on about him and what she missed about him and how lost she felt. You may come anytime you wish, I said, even just to leave your tears. You don't need an excuse. This is, after all, the tear bank. Alice was upset, screaming, shouting, livid with anger and even rage, panicked and terrified, and then a monsoon of tears. Which emotion to tackle first was the question and the worry. I've learned to live with tears. I'm not immune, and on the very odd occasion, actually joining in them. But on this occasion, what was the overriding emotion? I could give you doctors a clinical diagnosis. That's the easy way. Diabetic who'd been lost to follow-up, now with a very high white cell count, a CRP of 360, and a rotting foot. But she knew me, I thought. We had a good relationship. How could she stay away? I parked outside your clinic at least 4 times and could not go in, she said. The monsoon continued to erupt. I am stupid. I am useless, she wailed. Death would be the best option for me and for my girls. He can find another woman. She had it all worked out. Death, rather than reality, was the tune being played, and it was not a happy tune. This time, it was the kitchen roll and a bucket was filled. As we tried together to construct a pathway. I would love to have analyzed the substance of her tears. For hormones aplenty they were. They were safe with me. She knew that, and so did I. After all, we are the bank of tears. Rachel was well known to me. She had 2 families, and in her second family, she had a little girl whose whole life had been sick. She had cystic fibrosis, and in those days, the prognosis was poor. She was about 10 years old and had come home to die. I had been in and out of the house supporting them. I was interrupted in my surgery one morning to take the call that she had died. I left the surgery and drove to her house, and when I got out of my car, I could hear the raw wailing like the banshee. I shall never forget it. When I went in, Rachel was wailing and her little girl, a rag doll in her arms. The priest was crying, and he asked me had I any words of comfort for Rachel. My own tears were dripping down my face as I said, no, this is an abomination. Sarah is 92, a fabulous lady who rarely consulted me, only when necessary, still walking daily and living alone. And as she spoke to me, her tears were flowing, something I had never witnessed before in her. I had been around when her husband died. No tears, but just now flowing. Her daughter-in-law had died in a tragic accident, and she was devastated for her grandchildren, who are now motherless and, as she said, rudderless. And I am now too old to act in loco parentis. She sobbed, and her tears were safe with me. Linda was a patient for about 10 years. She had enormous stress issues in her life, and depression, and fibromyalgia, and she had told me that she was a victim of child abuse, but would always say, I don't want to talk about it. I respected that. Today, she started with, I consider you my friend. I said nothing, wary of the relationship becoming overfamiliar. She proceeded to tell me about the most horrendous childhood she had. No sex abuse, but abuse of the worst kind, locked in her room, lights turned out, beaten and threatened, and caught between her brothers and her parents. The tears poured down her face, vivid details described, and my heart melted for that innocent child. I've never told anyone else, she said. Safe with me, I said. After all, this is where you can bank your tears. Science tells us that we've 3 kinds of tears. Not that science matters much to the crying person. Basal tears that are there all the time, they keep the eyes healthy and contain oil and mucus and salt. Irritant tears, these are the tears that wash your eyes out when you peel an onion and vomit or get dust in your eye. And psychic or emotional tears. These tears gush in response to strong emotions like sadness, grief, joy, or rage. They have the same chemical makeup as basal tears, but contain more stress hormones and some natural painkillers. And it can bring about empathy or compassion in other people. Some studies suggest people are more likely to feel better after crying if they receive social support while doing it. How do we value a bank? One that is reliable, safe, and consistent. One where your deposits are safe and you sometimes gain high interest. One where a long-term relationship is valued. General practice is the bank for tears, and as such, priceless. Thank you.